Hello. Welcome to Reading Time. My name's Time, and this week we're reading To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Let's get to reading. To Kill a Mockingbird is a novel about a girl named Scout in the 1930s in rural Alabama. The story is told from her perspective from about the time that she is 6 to 9 years old. And this book specifically examines American racism and the idea of justice. Now, this book is pretty well known in America and is often assigned as assigned reading in high school. Although I did manage to make it through high school without it ever being assigned to me, so this is actually my first read through of the book. Now, typically when I think of assigned reading, I generally have a negative connotation toward it. And I think that's just because when you are told that you have to read something, it doesn't feel as enjoyable typically as when you're just choosing to read something. And I found now that I'm not in school and I no longer have assigned reading, I actually enjoy those same books a lot better than I did in high school. Some of that may also come from the fact that I'm not trying to balance a bunch of other classes besides an English class, but either way, I enjoyed this book a lot more than I thought I was going to. I enjoyed this book so much that I am going to give it 5 stars. I was pleasantly surprised with the narrative in general. I got through the book a lot faster than I thought I would. And this book does deal with some heavier topics, and I tend to like books that deal with those sort of things. I also enjoyed the perspective being from an unreliable narrator of a 6 to 9 year old girl who doesn't quite understand the heavy topics that are dealt with in the book and that are going on in the world around her. This book does contain quite a bit of content to be aware of. To begin with, there is a lot of violence in the book, and this violence ranges in severity. For example, there are a couple of schoolyard style fights, but then there are also other circumstances such as a lynch mob showing up in the middle of the night and threatening to kill someone, as well as a child getting their arm broken by a man, and a man dying by being stabbed, as well as a trial that is at the center of the book that revolves around a man being accused of raping and beating a woman. This book does contain some sexual content, as seen in the previous example I used in violence, where a man is accused of rape. So this is discussed a little bit. However, Scout, the main character, is young and doesn't quite understand everything, and no one is very explicit in their explanations, but it is still something that is discussed. Scout is also kissed by one of her friends, but this isn't described in detail, and this seems to be innocent in nature. For substance usage, there is one character in the book who is secretly addicted to morphine. However, they end up weaning themselves off of the drug. There is also a man who pretends to be the town drunk, but it turns out that he's actually just drinking Coca-Cola out of a bag. And there are also various levels of characters drinking and smoking. These characters are adults, but to the most extreme example, there are some who buy whiskey and other alcohol instead of feeding their children. For language in this book, there is frequent profanity throughout the book, as well as usage of racial slurs throughout the book. In addition to all of this content, there is also a suggestion that some of the characters are being abused by their father. This is not any of the main characters in the book. It's something that the reader has to infer instead of it being explicitly stated. However, that is present as well. And as such, I am going to leave information for how to receive help if you or someone you know are in those circumstances, just as I do in other videos that contain that content. Now, because of the amount of content within the book, and because of the heavy nature of the topics being discussed therein, I would recommend this book for a high school age level, so 9th through 12th grade. And really, I think that preferably this shouldn't be taught below 11th grade. And even then, this book is definitely one that should be taught delicately. Now, as I said, this book deals very heavily with racism. And so it could very easily be examined from an ethnic studies literary lens, meaning that you can look at the book and focus on the different ethnic or racial groups within the book, how they interact with one another, and any sort of discrepancies. However, it is very important to know that this book is usually lauded as something that deals with racism really well and is a great example in American literature of the realities of racism at the time. However, it should be noted that this book is still limited in that regard because it was written from the perspective of a white girl, and the author herself was a white woman. And while it absolutely condemns racism in all forms, it also limits the voices of non-white characters in the text, and ultimately still others those groups. Another literary lens that you could use for this text is the feminist literary theory lens. This is a lens that encourages you to examine the different gender dynamics within the book, and it is one that I think could be used very well, as Scout is raised by a single father and her older brother, and so she has a lot of interests that are considered more masculine than feminine. And since the book is set in the 1930s, this is often looked down on by those around her. And so Scout is getting some conflicting worldviews. On the one side, her brother basically uses the term girl negatively. But then on the other side, she has a lot of women in her life who are trying to encourage her to wear dresses more and behave more femininely. So looking at how these different influences are affecting her would be especially interesting to look at in a time period that was driven by more traditional expectations of gender norms. And really, there are so many other ways that you can look at this book, and I think that's another reason why I enjoyed this book so much, is that there's a lot of depth to it that you can dive into. And so even though I do think it is limited in its perspective, and I do think that it should be paired with other texts if you're going to be talking about really any of these theories, either race or gender or otherwise focused, I still think it is an absolutely amazing 5-star text. For this week's poster square, we are on the top row with a picture of a mockingbird, just like the namesake of the book. Let me know what you thought of To Kill a Mockingbird down in the comments below. Is it one that you had to read in high school? And if so, what did you think about it? And let me know if you have any other book recommendations for me to read and review. Feel free to subscribe to the page if you are not already subscribed, and share this video with your friends. You can also follow me on social media on either Facebook or Instagram. As always, I hope that you have a marvelous week and a wonderful read.